in general, when I talk about interactions between people, including parents and kids, I think about how much emotional intensity is in a situation. What's the level of emotional charge, right? Big emotions, little emotions, no emotions in particular. And so I think about it as happening in three zones, big picture. One is when nobody's especially upset, just kind of life as usual. You get up in the morning and you have cereal and, you know, nobody falls on the floor. So this is when you build relationships and strengthen the relationship and the cooperation. And then there's times when people are having emotions, maybe even strong emotions, right? Positive or negative, very proud, very happy, scared, angry, jealous, whatever it is. And this is time when you do supportive interactions and you help people hold and maybe process the emotions. And then there's people freaking out essentially, and to the point that it becomes a safety concern. And at that point you do crisis intervention and all the rules flip kind of upside down, right? You focus on safety and you may sacrifice the relationship temporarily. Whereas in the green and the yellow zone, the focus is always relationship. That's how I orient to it anyway. I always think long-term, how do I make the relationship stronger all the time? That's the thing that's most important because parenting is kind of a long-term game. So today, talking about building habits, we are solidly in the green zone, right? These are things that we do when things are okay, when nobody's especially upset. Other workshops, other times, we might talk about other places on this map, but right now the context is everybody's like living kind of a normal, unupset life right now. Okay, why even think about habits? So habits are extremely powerful, right? Habits are automatic behaviors that we perform that really don't require us to even make conscious decisions or do a lot of hard processing or anything like that. So if we have the habit of brushing our teeth in the morning, then and in the evening, ideally, I'm told. So if we do that, then we likely are going to benefit from really good dental health and all the benefits that come out of that, right? And we don't have to think about it hard every time and decide whether or not to do it. It's just automatic. So establishing that as a habit is a huge bonus. And you can think about any other part of your life the same way, right? Do we have a habit of exercising, eating healthy, eating at certain times, being nice to people at certain times, good study habits and so on, right? So the more important stuff we can put into the form of habits, the easier life becomes, right? The more momentum we build in life. And so such a great gift to give our kids, helping them establish healthy habits and ideally helping them learn how to intentionally create their own habits. So habits are automatic, require no processing or decisions, and habits, the more you do them, the more you do them, right? It becomes a stronger and stronger and stronger habit. So I'll start with the bottom line, which I like to do for people that have limited time or limited attention span. So here it is, the next 30 seconds, ready? The bottom line is this. The most important part of building a new habit and the hardest part by far is the very first step, right? This is the part that you want to be paying the most attention to. You want to be immediately successful when you're starting to establish a new habit. I'll give lots of examples in a bit so it doesn't stay abstract, but all the attention, I would say, should be focused on being off to a good start when building a new habit. It should feel good, it should be easy, you know, it should not create resistance, and then you keep going. People sometimes orient toward like, you know, after you do it 100 times, you get a bonus, right? But it's actually that very first time that is the hardest. And that's where you build the most important part of the momentum. It's a little abstract, but really that's the bottom line. So again, for those of you that need to take a nap, you're done, congratulations. And for those of you that wanna keep going, let's keep going together. Oh, right, so this book is amazing. I am not paid by anyone to say this, nor will I be paid if you buy it. I think this is one of those, you know, top 10 life-changing, you know, super practical books. Atomic Habits. I strongly, strongly recommend it. Some of the stuff that I'll say here comes from it, some not, but it's an excellent book about habits and building habits. Atomic Habits. Maybe Bev, would you be willing to just put the name of the book in the chat? Atomic Habits by James Clear. Okay. One concept before we dive into really specifics, the idea of the relational bank account. I use this concept a lot. So between any two people, there's a certain amount of goodwill that's being built. And I think of it like an account balance in the relational bank account. And the higher the goodwill in the relationship, the more goodwill your child feels toward you. The more your child will trust you, be honest with you, be vulnerable with you, put effort into requests that you make, forgive you when you make mistakes, cooperate with you, and so on. This is super relevant for building habits, right? Because in all likelihood, you're trying to help them do something that they wouldn't just naturally do. Otherwise, they wouldn't need your help with it. And so when you ask them to do something they wouldn't naturally do, you're using some of that goodwill. So you need to build it up before you use it, right? So this is something to keep in the, I would say, middle of your mind as you think about all this. The way to build goodwill is to show care and respect. There are lots of ways to show care and respect. We're not going to go into all of them today. Most of them are obvious, right? You make their favorite food and you let them know that you made that food because it's their favorite food. You ask for their opinion about where to go for the family vacation and you actually consider it, right? You show them respect in this way. When they say not now, you say, okay, when is a good time? And you show them respect this way. You say, thank you. You say, please, you see all the good things they do. You just show care and respect. There are lots of opportunities during the day to do this. And again, this is kind of a separate conversation, a separate workshop. I think we have a recording of one of the workshops on that called Cooperation Without Conflict. So it's a very optimistic name. I'd say Cooperation with Less Conflict. But these are all things that you can do. The way that you reduce the amount of goodwill in a relationship is you show kids that you don't care about them or that you don't respect them, right? You just stomp over boundaries that they set up. You ignore their requests. You ignore their input. You ignore their comfort, whatever it is. So when they see you doing that, the amount of goodwill diminishes. The other way to diminish the amount of goodwill in a relationship is to ask the other person to do something that they wouldn't normally do. And that is normal. This is what we do in relationships, right? Can you please pick up the whatever and bring it back home? Can you do this for me? Can you help me with that? It's fine. It's part of how relationships work. But be mindful that the more you ask, the more you draw on the goodwill. And so you want to also be mindful of making deposits back into the goodwill. And the idea is that you want to be pretty high on goodwill. You want to have high credit when you ask your kid to do things that don't come normally to this kid and to do them regularly, right? Building a habit. So goodwill, here's how I think about it, right? High levels of goodwill, you will see your kid spontaneously going out of his way to be helpful to you. Really just sitting there thinking, how can I make that happen, right? Obviously, this is a fantasy scenario for most of us most of the time, but that's kind of the ideal version, right? It's so much credit that they're thinking about how to make things for you, right? They're just giving you the special credit card because you have such high credit score. Medium, which is a good aspirational, like I think attainable level, is basically when you ask, they'll do pretty cheerfully, as long as it's not too much of an inconvenience. That's kind of okay, like good working relationship, everybody's cooperating, everybody's happy around each other. Low, if you're asking for something and your kid is like, I don't know, and if that's most of the time what's happening, that's a sign that your goodwill is kind of fluttering on the low side, right? That the goodwill that your kid feels toward you, the account balance, it's kind of on the lower side. It's a sign that maybe you need to be thinking more about opportunities to deposit by showing care and respect. Then there's a nightmare scenario if you're in overdraft. So you can go into overdraft by forcing your kid to do things that your kid doesn't want to do, right? Because you have a lot of power. We like to think, but really you can't force your kid to do a lot of things that your kid doesn't want to do. And if you force your kid to do inconvenient things and you go below a certain line, you're really with negative credit at that point. And that is really bad. And the baddest example of this is kind of the opposite of high credit, right? They just sit there thinking about how to make your life miserable. How can I annoy dad? Not a place we want to be at, because they are geniuses at that kind of stuff. Okay, so this is all background, basically, again, kind of abstract stuff. But let's talk about building good habits. And specifically, let's talk about how to fail at helping your kid build a good habit. So it's a very simple recipe. If you want to make sure that your kid does not develop a good habit, quickly ask them to do something that is unpleasant and frustrating and that doesn't feel important to them, right? If you ask them to immediately do this, then they will immediately not, and nothing will happen. So of course, the opposite is true. Habits stick if the change is slow, right? Slow change is sustainable change. Think about every diet you've ever heard about anybody doing. Slow change is sustainable change. They need to feel successful immediately. I'll talk more about what that means, but they cannot be like, I wonder if this is working, or if I just do this for another 200 days, then I'll feel great. But it immediately needs to feel successful and pleasant to do. That's a challenge that requires some thinking and strategizing in advance, and it needs to feel relevant. They need to feel like this is something that is going to help them with regards to something they care about. So some specifics. Relevant. When you're thinking about a habit that you'd like to help your child build, and you might have 6 different things in your head right now, right? Some things that will be helpful for you, some that will be helpful for your kid, some that will be helpful for the world or for your kid's sibling, whoever. But you have this list. Clear the dishes, walk the dog, do homework between 5 and 6, brush your teeth regularly at night, and whatever. First of all, I would say don't try everything all at once. It's unlikely anybody in the world has enough credit with their kid to make all these changes at once, right? So you kind of build a plan of attack. And I would say start with the thing that they're most likely to agree with, not the thing that is most important that they have for the rest of their life, because you're building a momentum of cooperation, right? So think, what's the easiest of all of these? And you might say, clearing dishes. That's not a big deal, right? It's just a few steps to the kitchen. Even though I'd love my kid to walk the dog, I dearly love that, but that's a lot harder. And the homework, really hard. So let's start with the dishes and kind of see what happens. But you don't have to decide this on your own. You can consult with your kid. And I strongly encourage you to consult with your kids as much as possible about as much as possible, right? So you might say, hey, there are a few things that I thought could be really helpful, right? You start by maybe things that are important for your kid. I know that you want to be an astronaut, and astronauts need to be very, very good at math and horticulture if you end up getting stuck on Mars. And so let's think about, I was thinking about how can we help you feel better about math. And one of the things I'm thinking is about, so you make the link to things that they care about. You can also make the link to things that you care about. You might say, look, it's a lot of work. We have 5 people here and 2 animals. It's a lot of legs walking around the house. And I need a little bit of help with some of these things, right? And you're big now and you can help with it. So there are a couple of things that would be super helpful for me if you could do. And that would leave me with more energy to help you with these things and so on. So you really talk it through with them and then say, so here are the 4 things that I've been thinking about. What do you think? Which of these feels most important? Do any of these feel important? And have an honest conversation about it. You can do it at very, very young ages. Use age-appropriate language, but you can consult with your kid about so much stuff so early on, and it's such an enormous sign of respect to do that. That's you're building credit as you're preparing to make a withdrawal. Okay, pleasant. So the attempt, that first step in building a habit needs to be pleasant. And the easiest way to make it pleasant is to just immediately reward them, right? Praise them, thank them, notice what they're doing immediately, right? Don't let it, it's not the kind of situation where I'll tell you if you do it wrong, right? You want to absolutely help them feel proud and happy and appreciated as soon as they take that first step toward the thing. They lift the plate and you're like, thank you so much, this is wonderful. I'm so glad you're helping clear the dishes. A word about frequency of rewards. So in AA or NA, you get a lot of tokens early on, right? When you stop the behavior that you want to stop, but that you're still it's very fresh in your memory and the temptation is very strong, right? You get less tokens later on, which is for some people a little counterintuitive. You're thinking like, I should get more recognition when I'm a year sober than when I'm a month sober. But it's so much harder to be a month sober, right? And not fall off the wagon, right? Because it's so fresh, it's so recent. And it's a little bit like that. It's kind of first gear, right? Is more work than second gear, than third gear, than fourth gear. So reward, praise, thanks, all of this need to happen a lot at the beginning, more so than later on, right? This is part of how you make it pleasant for them to do. Okay, successful. That first step that I showed you before, right? That's so important. You never want you want your kid saying, sure, I can do this, no problem, right? You don't want them to say, what? You want me to do what? And I don't think so. You don't want that kind of resistance. You don't want that kind of reaction at all, ever. So you pick a goal together with your kid, right? As you consult, that your kid thinks is very achievable. And then you cut that goal in half, right? So you say, homework, okay. How much time do you feel like you're able to sit and concentrate? Like if you tried, how much time can you sit and concentrate on the math homework? And they're like, I don't know, 30 minutes. And you give them the eyebrow and you're like, 30 minutes, really? And they're like, yeah, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes. And you say, okay, great. How about 5 minutes? I realize my math is off here, but right. But you give them a goal that is very, very achievable in their minds. You do not want them to feel like they need to stretch and maybe succeed, right? They need to feel, if I give this minimal effort, I'll succeed. Right? That's the mindset. That's the first step. So very, very minimal first step. And and then you celebrate that enormously when it happens, right? 5 minutes, amazing, good work. You fulfilled your part of the deal. I'm really impressed. This is wonderful. If you do this every day, then, in 2 weeks, you will have built hours more of practice, and so on. And similarly, as it progresses, the increments in the goals that you're setting are similarly achievable all the time. Right, so you don't go from 5 minutes homework every day to an hour every day. Right, once 5 minutes is really easy, and your kid is like, "This is easy," and maybe they're even spontaneously going like 7, 8 minutes or whatever. Then you say, "Okay, this seems to be going very well. Is this helping you? Do you feel like a little more prepared at school or whatnot?" Right, so the consulting continues. And if they say, "Yeah, I think this is helpful," or they're like, "It's helping a little, but not quite," and you say, "Okay, well, 5 minutes seems very doable for you. How do you feel about upping it? Like maybe 10 minutes every day." And again, the sign for you that you're suggesting a good goal is when they're not going, I don't know, like, you don't want to be convincing them that it's possible. The reaction that you are looking for is, yeah, I can do that, right? That's the level. And you probably know what kind of goals they'll give that reaction to, right? So that's the level of increment you're looking for. And you're just constantly incrementing this way, right? Slow and steady. Because slow change is sustainable change. Okay. Let me pause for a second. Charlene, so far in the chat, are there any questions?
No, it stopped working. I don't know why.
Oh,
there is
Charlene?
one good question, Iran.
Yeah.
You ready? Okay, the question is, I wonder about types of rewards for older kids.
Anytime. I stick by that. I will say that even recorded. I think praise is a huge deal from parents at any age, really. But also, I am a fan of consulting with the kids. And I think if this is a habit that they want to build, then you can ask them, what's a good way to reward yourself if this succeeds? What do you think would make sense? And this is part of where you teach them the meta skill of how to teach myself good habits. And they go, well, after I do it for 2 years, then I get this. And you're like, no, early is really hard. Let's do something. They're like, okay, after I do it for 1 day, I get 2 new cars. And you're like, no, let's pick something more, right? But you can decide on this together, what works for them. But in terms of what's in your power, it's attention, right? It's honest praise, honestly being moved by their success and showing it to them. That's still a big deal. In terms of stuff, I would consult with them. The bigger they are, I'd consult with them even more. Okay. Were there other questions, Charlene, that feel important now as opposed to later? Maybe, maybe not. Okay.
I'm sorry, Iran.
That's okay. I think we're all in suspense here.
You're on
Okay.
mute, Charlene.
I'll just continue for now and we'll figure it out later. So when working on sort of cementing new habits into place, here are the priorities that I would recommend in order. You want to structure the new behavior in a way that is, first and foremost, that it's consistent. Make sure that they're doing the thing always, even if it's a very tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of the thing at a low level of performance. For example, if you want them to be taking the dog out for a walk every day, maybe initially all you ask them is to remind you to take the dog for a walk at a certain hour. That's it. Or they clip the leash on the dog and then you walk the dog. That's it. But you want it to be consistent, because the most important part of a habit is the first step. The most important link in a habit is the first link. So ideally, you want them to spontaneously be like, oh, it's 3, time to think about the dog, right? You want that to happen spontaneously. And that happens from associating again and again and again, that external stimulus, 3 p.m., with something about the dog. There's something you can work on over time, right? Initially, it's calling you, clipping the thing, taking the dog on a walk, whatever it is. The something can change, but that initial step, initiating the habit consistently, that is the most important part of building a new habit, right? Putting on gym shoes and then taking them off and going to rest, fine, right? But if you put the gym shoes on at the right time, every time, you're starting to build the right habit. And then the thing can be working. So consistency, first of all, then quality of performance at whatever level of performance you indicated. So you agreed on. So clip the leash on the dog, right? Do it well. Then that's enough. If you're going to do 1 minute of cardio exercise every day, if you're going to try to meditate for 10 seconds, right? Whatever it is, you just try to do it really well for that step, for that amount of behavior that you decided on. Meditate for 10 seconds, right? If 10 seconds is really hard for you and you find yourself resisting the idea, 5 seconds, right? You go as low as you're sure that you can succeed, and then you do that. So you consistently do the thing well, even if it's a little bit of the thing. And then you start increasing the quantity, but without sacrificing the quality. Again, this is all, I'm hearing myself and I'm thinking this is like a little bit abstract. So, you know, you tell me if, oh no, there. And so we can get more concrete later if you need. General tips, and I'm almost done here. Picking a trigger is really important in the environment for this new behavior. So clearing dishes, that's pretty easy. When somebody says, thanks for dinner, that's time to clear the dishes. When somebody gets up from the chair, that means time to clear the dishes, right? So an external behavior. If it's 3 p.m., then you put the leash on the dog. If it's 5 p.m., then you start doing homework. If it's, school signed off, you do this thing. If you come into the house, you take your shoes off, whatever it is. Pick a very, very specific concrete trigger, time, place, event. It's really when blank, then blank. That's the structure, and you need to have it very clear in your head, and ideally in your kid's head too. The goals is where people sometimes stumble. So people like to pick achievement goals, right? I'll get an A, I'll publish a book, I'll perform at this, whatever, I will. And these are tricky goals because we can't really control the world around us so much, right? And we're not exactly setting ourselves up for success. It's aspirational, but it's tricky. It's nice to have it as, kind of an idea of what can happen, but I would really strongly advise you to pick goals that have to do with the work that you will put into something or that your kid will put into something. Right. And very specifically time. I think time is the best goal personally, right? 10 minutes of X every day, 20 minutes of X every week, whatever it is, right? Time we can control and monitor pretty easily, right? And then we can work on the quality of the performance, and then we can increase the time, right? So I cannot, I'm working on a book now. I've never published a book, so I don't know how long I need to do that. So to put a goal of publishing a book within 6 months, I could drive myself crazy, right? And I can feel very unsuccessful as a result, or I can end up really off kilter doing that, as opposed to saying 15 minutes of writing every day and kind of let's see what progress happens, right? That's a lot more controllable and a lot easier to do. So likewise, 10 minutes of math, right? I prefer, this may be hugely controversial, but I prefer, a goal of 15 minutes of homework every day than completing all of my homework every day. Because I don't know how long it takes to complete all of the homework every day. And what if it turns out to be an impossible amount or an unreasonable amount for my kid, right? We'll need to figure out then why does it take so long and so on. But I want the input, the effort on the part of my kid to be effort that feels right. And then we go backwards from there. So I strongly suggest picking goals or setting goals that have to do with input rather than output, because we don't control the output exactly. And then lastly, just making tracking easy if you can. If it's a thing that really requires tracking. So again, how many days did we do the homework, walk the dog, clear the dishes, whatever it is. And it can serve as a basis for rewards if you want to, or something like that. But just the tracking is easy. The stuff that we monitor is the stuff that happens, right? We all know this from work probably. And similarly with your kids, this is not, and I wouldn't introduce it as like, this is how we know when to reward you or when to punish you. It's this is how we're tracking if this is working.
You're on mute now, Aaron.
Okay, thank you. How far back did we go? A little bit, Deborah says, thank you. So, so the idea is that the tracking system is just there to help monitor if the goals were set up correctly, right? It's not about punishing you or rewarding you. It's about us figuring out if the goals are right, right? Because if they're right, then we'll see this happening. And if they're not, then we'll see this bumpy performance. Okay. Troubleshooting. So at some point, we're going to fall off the wagon. Your kid's not going to do the thing your kid was supposed to do or committed to doing or whatever. When this happens, the idea is just to move past it very, very quickly, right? You just say, okay, let's just get back on it tomorrow, right? And you don't compensate. So it's not that you miss 10 minutes today and it's bedtime and you're like, okay, tomorrow you'll do 20. No, tomorrow you'll do 10, because otherwise you're just setting yourself up for failure, right? 10 was potentially hard. 20 is going to be a lot harder. And the goal is not to punish. The goal is to make this a habit, make it an easy thing that doesn't evoke any resistance, right? So you don't compensate for what you missed. And you don't spend too much time on it, right? Because you don't want your kid to be having a negative association with this behavior. You don't want your kid thinking, homework, ooh, bad. That's when dad's upset, right? See, as much as possible, just move on. Be like, okay, how do we make sure that this happens tomorrow? What do we need to do, right? What would make it easier? So that's in terms of slipping and missing out on part of the habitual behavior that you're trying to build. In terms of bad habits, we might talk about this, in the discussion portion, but this is a question that comes up often. If there's a habit that your kid has that you would like your kid not to have, generally speaking, the way to go there, I would say, is to help them build a habit that makes that bad habit impossible to carry out, right? If they're always running, leaving footprints on the walls, make sure that they have, help them build a habit of running outside or taking their shoes off or, whatever is the blocking habit. If they have a habit of spending too much time, per your opinion, on the computer playing games with their friends, right? Build a blocking habit, like going out for a bike ride or whatever it is, right? That just makes it literally impossible to do the bad thing or the thing that you would like them to do less of. So blocking habits are much easier to set up than to tell kids, don't do this thing. Because then they're like, well, what should I do? Right? Whereas if you tell them do this thing, which prevents from doing that thing, great. And again, just to remind you, I'm a big fan of being very transparent and upfront about these things, right? Not trying to trick them into changing behavior, but discussing like, this is, I think, a problem for these reasons. Would you like to try to blah, 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 and having these conversations. Okay, quick summary. New habits stick if you start them slow, you make very slow increments in the goals. If they immediately feel successful, by virtue probably of having a low bar for success initially. If it feels nice to do them, and if they're connected to goals that your kid cares about. It's a good idea to have a very clear trigger for when to start that first step in the habit, like a time or a place or a behavior that somebody else does. It's very important to do it consistent. Consistency is the most important part of building a new habit. Even if you do just a tiny bit of a thing, if you do it consistently, then you can increase the thing. The consistency is the key here. And then ideally make it easy to track, just so you know if it's working. That's really the main goal, just so you know if it's working or if something needs to be changed. Okay, that's that about that. Quick plug here. So I run a class that's this version. We'll do it a 4-week class. It starts not in a couple days, but the week after that. So it'll start and end at the end of 2021. Mainly what I want you to know about the class is that it costs exactly as much as you need it to cost. I really don't want financial ability to be a barrier here. So